This video is going to very briefly review economics and economic systems. First off, economics is the study about how people make choices about how to use scarce resources to provide for society and how to distribute what's produced. Economics answers the questions, what do we produce given limited resources? How do we do that? And for whom? Who gets the spoils? It's all about choices, right? Because resources are scarce, so we have to make decisions. Economic systems describe the role of government in making that choice. They're modern economic systems that we are hopefully familiar with, like free market capitalism and communism. And the difference between these economic systems depends on the extent to which the government, the state itself, is involved in making choices about what to produce, how to produce, and then for whom. The government can be involved in economics in a number of ways. For example, it can create regulations, which are rules about what businesses can and cannot do. For example, businesses may decide how to pay workers, but the government might set a minimum hourly wage. That's a regulation. Or businesses may decide what to produce and how to produce it, but the government may create laws that ensure that this kind of production doesn't harm the environment. So pollution standards. They could have work safety standards, for example. Those are other regulations. Another way that governments can become involved in economic decisions involves redistributing the wealth that a country produces as a whole. So making sure that people generally get a share in the spoils. Examples of redistributing wealth that we should be pretty familiar with involve taxation systems. If I am super rich and I make a ton of money, the government may impose higher taxes on me and use those taxes to provide services for everybody, to pay for infrastructure, for example, like roads, in modern times to pay for public education systems. So those are different ways that the government may involve itself in choices about what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce that we should be familiar with because this is the world that we live in. Basic economic vocabulary includes consumers, those are people who buy goods. Producers, those are people who make goods. When a business's revenue, or the amount of money it earns, exceeds its costs, the amount of money it spends, the business makes a profit. And another phrase that you're going to hear pretty often is government intervention in the economy, which describes the state's role in making rules about the economy and making those regulations about how businesses can operate, and in redistributing wealth, usually via taxation systems. So like you can operate your business however you want, but you're going to get taxed a certain amount and use that tax money to provide for the general welfare. In modern times, since the Industrial Revolution, there have been three major economic systems, which vary or which are different depending on the extent to which, how much the government gets involved with or intervenes in the economy. So how much does the government tell businesses how to operate by creating rules or by redistributing the profits, redistributing wealth via taxation systems? There are three major economic systems, and they are different depending on how heavy a hand the government takes in making these choices. Starting all the way on the right, because this was historically the first one, we have the free market economy. A free market economy is what it sounds like. The markets are free. The government intervenes as little as possible in the economy. Supply and demand determine prices and goods available. So like the choice of what to produce and how to produce it are based on what people want and how much of it's available, supply and demand all by itself. And the government plays little to no role in saying what is produced or how businesses are run. So very few regulations, very little redistribution of wealth. The most extreme form of a free market economy, the very first one, is called Laissez Faire. Americans say Laissez Faire. It's the same thing. It's French for let it be. And in this version of a free market economy, the government plays absolutely no role whatsoever in making economic choices or in telling businesses how to operate. This means like minimum wage doesn't exist. Businesses can decide what to pay people all by themselves. No safety protections, no regulations about like pollution, nothing. This was the very first form of capitalism that developed. This was the very first free market economy that developed using a capitalist ideology, which we'll get to in a second, during the Industrial Revolution. And then because of the massive problems that it caused when businesses don't have any rules whatsoever governing how they operate or how they treat workers, we get the other versions of these economic systems. So laissez-faire was first, and then moving to the left, free market economies, mixed economies, and command economies were all kind of designed to fix the problems created by this totally free market. In the middle, we have mixed economies, which, again, is what it sounds like. They're a mix between a government taking full control over the economy and a free market in which a government plays no role whatsoever. In mixed economies, governments make some economic decisions to provide public services, and businesses and individuals make others. There are lots of different versions of this, but generally, private property still exists. Businesses still choose what to produce and how to produce it based on the market, the supply and demand. But taxation systems might be a little bit more heavy-handed to provide public services for everybody, like universal health care, like free college tuition, that sort of thing. Socialist governments tend to fall under mixed economies. Towards the left, we have in dark red a command economy, which again is what it sounds like. In command economies, governments have total control to command economic activity. That means the government centrally plans all economic activity with full power over what to produce, how to produce it, and distributing what gets produced. On the bottom of the slide, you'll see something of a spectrum that includes modern day states along this kind of spectrum of economic systems. All the way towards the right, not in a purely free market economy, but close, we have the United States. Towards the middle, a solid example of a mixed economy would be France or the Scandinavian countries. And all the way to the far right, we have what remains of communist countries, like North Korea and Cuba especially, involve the government having full power to direct economic activity. I keep saying communist, capitalist, and socialist, and there's a reason for that. Economic systems don't operate all by themselves. They need some guidance, right? And on this slide, I have the economic systems on the top row. Ideologies are systems of beliefs and values for what's best for the state, kind of define the goals of these economic systems. So like, why should we have a free market economy? Why would a mixed economy be best? Why would a state decide that a command economy is a good idea? Ideologies answer the why question. And these are the names that may be more familiar to you. We're going to start with laissez-faire and free market economies all the way to the right again because we're going in chronological order. Capitalism is the ideology that tends to pair with a free market. Why is it best for a government to intervene as little as possible in the economy? Well, capitalism answers that question. Capitalism involves the markets being free so that businessmen who could invest capital, who like fund startup monies to create business, can make the most profit. Under capitalist systems, Profit is the goal. And in the United States, we live in this world. Capitalism holds that when businessmen, when individual private people start a business and they make choices for their business, even if they're making choices that are selfish and involve them wanting to make the most money, society as a whole will benefit because competition and supply and demand will ensure all by itself that we produce what people want and at the lowest possible price because of competition. So capitalism holds that profit seeking for businesses is good for society as a whole. Society's needs are met under capitalism by private wealth. So if you have money, you succeed. You can buy what you need. If you are unemployed, if you don't have money, however, there are very few provided protections because under capitalism, taxation is very low for the top earners so that they can reinvest money and create businesses, which in theory creates jobs, although that doesn't actually tend to work out. We'll get to that in lessons in the future. And under capitalism, people are valued only really to the extent that they're economically productive. So if you have a job, you should be able to pay for what you need. If you don't have a job, the implication is kind of it's probably your own fault and you deserve what you get. So capitalism values the success of business and profit over the health of society and people, and definitely workers. In terms of the economic question, the bottom row, what goods and services to produce and how and to whom, capitalism answers that question by saying we produce what the market, supply and demand, says people want based on what they choose to buy and what business owners decide to make, which is based on supply and demand too. For whom is the tricky question, because under capitalist systems, we use resources to provide things for people who can afford the price of goods, which are set by supply and demand and business owners. So again, society as a whole doesn't benefit. Your ability to purchase something is what gives you access to the resources of the nation and the state. In addition, although the idea is that supply and demand is really efficient in telling the market what to produce, it also leads to a system where we use resources to produce things that only rich people can buy instead of producing things that everybody needs. So we have markets for like really silly things. I'm sure you can think of consumer products that are just kind of funny that they exist, while at the same time, people are starving, people are earning poverty rates. So this was the first economic system and ideology, and it ran the Industrial Revolution. Problems with this system included workers were not being paid enough to live. There were no social protections. So if a worker got injured, there was no insurance. There was no way for him to get help. No education for the working class, massive pollution, just massive, massive social problems. As a result of these problems, people kind of rethought both the economic system and the ideology that government, and socialism, the second ideology that pairs pretty well with mixed economies, was developed. Socialism, here I'm in the middle column, second row. Socialism is an ideology that has its goal to reduce inequality, specifically the inequality that was created by a capitalist free market. Socialism varies. There are lots of different flavors, if you will, but generally, under socialism, the government creates regulations, rules, and taxation systems to fund some public goods for everybody, like schools, like universal health care, unemployment services, like tuition for college, that sort of thing. While most businesses otherwise run without government interference. At least this is what socialism is like today. This is how it appears in modern day France, Scandinavian countries, etc. Society's needs are met under socialism by the state redistributing wealth, usually through taxation, to provide basic services like healthcare, welfare systems, disability insurance, that sort of thing. And again, this varies. The extent to which a state does this is different in different places. We'll talk about that also later on in the unit. For the economic questions, what goods and services to produce and how and for whom, socialism answers that question by producing what society wants as expressed on the free market, like supply and demand, but also the services that benefit society as a whole, like schools, like healthcare, all being planned centrally. And so what that means in some places is that like healthcare isn't a private business. In the United States it is, it's run for profit. In other states, like France, like Sweden, healthcare is a state-run service. So the state, in a sense, owns that business and operates it for everybody. In terms of for whom, like who gets the resources that society produces? In socialist countries, some services are for everybody, like the basic human rights type services, while some goods are priced based on the market. So if you want an iPhone, you still have to go pay for it, but if you break a leg, you can go to the hospital and get that taken care of. Socialism, as it developed historically, involved a little bit more emphasis on state-run businesses for the public good. And out of this desire, and seeing continued inequalities created by the capitalist system, specifically like how hard it was on the working class, a new economic ideology developed. And that economic ideology is called communism. So we are on the dark red column now. Communism was an ideology that's particularly tricky to understand in historical context because the idea came before any attempt to actually do it, and attempts to actually install communist governments occurred in places that were not ideal for it, according to the person who developed communism, Karl Marx. And again, we'll get to this in class, but generally, communism is an ideology about a command economy designed to provide equality, equal access to resources, and ending the exploitation of workers. The idea for communism is that the people who actually add value to society aren't the people who own the businesses or the machines. It's the people who work, the people who add their labor to create value from the resources that exist in society. And yet, the workers don't get a fair share of the value of their work. Communism holds that everybody in a society should have equal access to the spoils of a society's resources. And the only way to do that is to have a centrally planned economy, to have a state fully in control of economic activity, deciding what gets produced so that we're sure we produce things that everybody needs, not just things that some people want, how it gets produced, and how the economy generally functions. The idea for communism was that socialism wasn't enough. Workers are going to continue to get exploited. And given all of the wealth that is created in industrial economies, when we have the ability to mass produce things in factories, there should be enough wealth to provide for everybody. Under communism, the idea is that the state provides for people's needs, saying what is produced and how resources are allocated to create a system where equality exists. In terms of the economic questions, what to produce, how, and for whom, the state, the government, centrally plans all of this in order that everybody can equally share in the fruits of their labor and the resources of the land, in theory. Much like Laissez Faire extreme capitalism, communism in practice has not tended to work out as well as Karl Marx had hoped, for reasons that we'll get into in class for sure. For now, what you need to know, and if you are not super familiar with these ideologies, is the definitions of everything highlighted on this slide. So I suggest you copy this chart. Laissez-faire economics, free market economy, associate those two together, along with the ideology of capitalism. It says the market should be free so that we can have a profit. Make sure you know what a mixed economy is, and that the government takes some heavier role in making economic decisions, because socialism says we need to reduce inequality, and the way to do that is for governments to create regulations and taxation systems to fund public goods, to redistribute wealth a little bit. And then command economies, with the government centrally planning all economic activity. Communist economies are not the, communist ideology is not the only ideology that works with command economies, but in modern times, this is the association that you should be making. Under communism, for the full national resources to be used to benefit everybody, you need a really heavy-handed government to command the economy, to direct all economic activity.